So in this video we'll learn about where the various parts of drums falls on the music sheet. For example, considering where the bass drum comes, where the snare drum comes, where the tom and the cymbal and the hi-hat. The bottom portion of the drums is called as the bass drum. So this one is the bass drum. Okay, and this one is the snare drum. These are the toms. So it's tom, this is the first tom, second tom, the third tom. So toms are often referred as, since this tom is at the top, it's called as high tom. Next one is the mid tom, and next one is the floor tom. So this is the tom which is getting the higher position here. So if you can see, this tom is placed first, so it's called high tom. The mid tom is in between high tom and the floor tom, so it's called as mid tom. This one it's called as floor tom because it's placed on the floor. And this one is the hi-hat. This one is the cymbal. If you take the hi-hat, there are two options. The first one is open hi-hat. Open hi-hat means you can see the pedal down here, and if you just open the pedal and hit the stick here, you can get the open hi-hat sound. And if you close the pedal with your legs, you will get the closed hi-hat sound. To understand this clearly, I'll just show you the drum pad image here. Okay, so if you set the closed hi-hat like this is the sound of the closed hi-hat. This is the sound of the open hi-hat. Okay, then this is the bass drum. This is the snare and the toms. Tom 1, tom 2. Tom 3 is your wish. So if you want to set the tom 3, we can set tom 3, or we can just set tom 1 and tom 2. These are the cymbals. Okay. Okay. Now we are going to see where these toms, snare, bass drum, etc. comes in the music sheet. So in order to understand this clearly, we are going to go same as the order of the drums. Okay. Now if you see the drums, you can see the bass drum is placed below every other drums. Okay, so the bass drum comes in the last line in the music sheet. So bass drum is also referred to as kick drum. Kick drum, bass drum, all are same. So bass drum comes in the last line. And then if you come after bass drum, you could see the tom 3 is placed next to it. Okay, so tom 3, that is the floor tom. So floor tom comes the line above the bass drum, the spaces. So totally the 5 lines will be there, 1 2 3 4 5. So kick drum is the space between the 4th line and the 5th line. The tom 3 is in the space between the 3rd line and the 4th line. Okay, then after that, if you see, we have finished bass, we have finished floor tom. Now we are going to go for the next one. As you can see clearly, above the height of the floor tom, we have the snare drum. Okay, first bass, floor tom or tom 3, then the snare drum. So the snare drum will come in the space between the 2nd line and the 3rd line. So you can see a gradual increase here. So the bass drum here, the tom 3 here, the snare drum here. So we have learned 3 drums so far. Now we are going to go for the other 2 toms. So if you see here, tom 1 comes just right above the snare drum. The snare drum is here, tom 1 is here. So snare drum and then tom 1. So tom 1 comes immediately after the snare drum. So if you see in the sheet music, just ignore tom 2 for a minute. We'll just go for the tom 1. So we saw snare drum in the space between line 3 and 4. Now straightly we jump to tom 1. We'll come back to tom 2 in a minute. So if you see tom 1, it's in the space between line 1 and line 2. Now coming to tom 2, if you can see the drums, the tom 1 is here, the snare is here. The tom 2 is in the between snare and tom 1. So tom 2 is in between both these toms. So automatically we don't have any option. So the tom 2 alone comes on the line. You can see here tom 2 comes on the line. So other parts of the drums comes in the spaces between these lines. So tom 2 alone comes on the line. Because we have tom 1 here, the space between first line and the second line, and the snare drum is the space between second line and third line, and we have no option than to put tom 2 on the second line itself. So tom 2 comes on the second line itself. Then the other things, so we have covered 5 things so far: kick drum, floor tom, snare drum, tom 1, tom 2. Then coming to the hi-hat. So hi-hat, you can see here, hi-hat and the other symbols will be represented as X. So this tom, snare drum, everything will be in oval shape. You can see here oval shape. The other things, the hi-hat and the crash symbols will come in X. So the hi-hat falls just on the first line. So if you just imagine other line going above this first line, you can see the hi-hat falls in the space here between the imaginary line and the first line. So if you just consider here a line going, so the hi-hat falls in the space between the imaginary line and the first line. So hi-hat is denoted as X. Then the symbol, okay, symbol is denoted as X, but is on the imaginary line. You see here clearly. I'll just draw it and show. Okay, consider this as the imaginary line. So if you consider this as the imaginary line, the hi-hat comes in the space between the imaginary line and the first line. Usually we don't represent the imaginary line, this sheet music, it's only 5 lines, but for the sake of understanding purpose I'm telling this. So the hi-hat comes in the space between the imaginary line and the first line, and the symbol comes on the imaginary line itself. So you can see the symbol comes on the imaginary line. The other things is not required for the rhythm pad, it's mainly focused for drums. So in order to learn where these the snare drum, bass drum and every other parts of a drum to play in rhythm pad, you have to just check it with the drum set, the manual drum set. So if you learn from the manual drum set, you can clearly easily understand. So just to recap, we are going to come from the bottom, the bass drum. So the last line is the bass drum, then above that we have tom 3, then the snare drum, and then go to tom 1. So all these are coming in between the spaces, and tom 2 alone comes on the line, on the second line, and the hi-hat is X and the symbol is X, but the symbol will be on the imaginary line. On the imaginary line, hi-hat will be on in between the space of the imaginary line and the first line. Okay, now we'll just hear the sound of these instruments. So for example, the bass drum, the snare drum, hi-hat, tom 1, tom 2, symbol, and then the open hi-hat. Thank you.